10 o'clock, and all is well. All right, so I guess this year we've done away with the children, and I will be your room mother. So Kevin, I didn't get to see you earlier. I've got time cards, so I'll let you know halfway when you're halfway through. Okay, well, I'm gonna wave it really hard. So I want to introduce Kevin Elmy. He's really super great.
Don't brag on him already.
He's really good. Unfortunately, he is married, so if there's any single ladies in here or gents, he does have a wife, and they live in Canada. So this is like, well, summer weather, as you'll notice. He's got his short sleeves on. They live on the family farm there, and they've been using cover crops, and I assume no-till, a system, correct, since 2008. He travels Western Canada, but if you still want to stalk him, I mean follow him on Facebook, ask him to be your friend. He does share a lot of really good information. I know I follow you, and I always find something new and interesting and different on his Facebook posts that he does. So if you are not here to see Kevin Elmy for water conservation, you're in the wrong room, but otherwise, Kevin, take it away.
Thank you. And just so you know, sold the farm
Oh,
in
no.
Alberta now, and I'm consulting
Full time.
Yeah, so, and busy, so it's good.
Okay.
Well, you can be this close and waving, so I will see you.
You're gonna see me, I'll sit right here.
So cover cropping in dry climates. Surprise, I thought it always rains in the Midwest, but didn't think anybody was gonna show up. But anyways, so the cover cropping in dry climates. Spent last year, 2023 in Australia, and interesting perception when we start talking about dry. So this is on Ian and Di Haggerty's ranch. That year, I think they end up with about an inch of rain through the whole growing season, and they spend they get their rain over 5 months. 7 months they get no rain, and that 1 inch over those 5 months really didn't do much, did it? But because they haven't really messed up their ecosystem, you can see green. I don't know if you can see right at the back. I could kind of see it, but I know what I was looking for. But something was happening, and so starting off with Dr. Beck talking about what he was doing. Yeah, there's going to be some overlap here. And so how do they keep the ecological, we're halfway already?
No.
Oh, okay. You really.
These signs have something extra on them, but I did not.
You're waving the half, and I'm like, whoa.
I'll wave it, and you'll know.
So because of their management and their system, they still had functioning system out there in the soil. Plants were growing. It's amazing. Inch of rain, 95% sand, 1% organic matter. Anybody have anything like that? Yeah. Guess what? It's really daunting. But once we get this natural system rolling, natural things start happening. So it's really awesome. So Jimmy said I was supposed to keep him out of his name's out of his, but nurse came in and said, "Doctor, there's a man waiting in the waiting room who thinks he's invisible. What should I tell him?" Well, the doctor said, "Tell him I can't see him today." So once again, my girls hate the my dad jokes, but a lot of these things that just kind of they work. So Sir Albert Howard, if another great reading book to add to the list is the Agriculture Testament, written in the early 1900s, and Sir Albert Howard he came up with a quote of the health of the soil, plant, animal, and man is one and indivisible, and talking about absolutely nailing it, because and once again, this quote was probably from 1940, and there's enough gray hair in the room. When we were going to school, how many kids had allergies? That kid? My wife ran a preschool for 10 years in eastern Saskatchewan, and she had an allergy section. Most of them had to continue on the back of the page. Why? Maybe something's going wrong with their food. What's going wrong with food? Our plants aren't getting the nutrition, our animals aren't getting nutrition because the soils aren't getting nutrition because we don't have biology. So having Dr. James White last year, it put me on a different plane for plant and animal nutrition. Then in Edmonton, there's the Grazing and Soil Health Conference, the first part of December. He was there doing another hour and a half chat. And now he's asking if I'm head back to Australia because he'd like to go over there and do some talks over there too. So really great guy, great information. So when we start talking about soil health principles, the 5 that I work on are keeping a plant in the vegetative stage for as many days as possible throughout the whole year. We want to increase the functional plant family diversity in our rotation and our stands. We want to reduce the amount of tillage we do. We want to reduce the reliance on synthetic inputs, and we want to properly incorporate livestock. In the past, this last one, I would just put incorporate livestock. People say, oh yeah, I already have livestock on the land. Okay, well, yes, you can have livestock on the land, but are we doing it properly? Are we actually getting the proper animal impact instead of actually, hurting our soils, moving it backwards? So as a quick demonstration, if anybody's in the room that wants to do a demonstration like this, there's a producer in southwest Saskatchewan. He had a drum filled full of soil, see the cover crop on top, and because he's in southwest Saskatchewan, there's cacti growing in his pastures, a little on the dry side, so he actually just gave this a little bit of water. During his crop walk, he got a grinder. He ground off about 1/3 of the barrel, got a garden hose and started just slowly running the water off to erode the soil away. How's that for a soil health demonstration, eroding the soil? But what he wanted to do is just to leach the soil away so we can see the rooting systems. So a nice visual of why we want to have these different functional plant groups in there. So when we start talking about water conservation in our soils, the first 3 things that we really need to talk about are armor, armor, and armor. And how do we do that? Reduce the tillage. We want to, keep that residue on the surface. We don't want to be exporting. You'll love being in central Alberta. Everybody, as soon as that combine is out of the field, the baler is in baling it up to get rid of that straw. And do I want to go into the tirade now about the system that we got stuck into, or do we want to do it later? We'll decide that. So there's a real wise man. He said we need to take the E out of ET, and that's exactly right. So hanging around Jay Fuhrer long enough, you'll get a few other things, but one of the sayings that Jay usually talks about, and I don't know where he got it from, but when we start talking about transpiring water, how do we transpire water? Through the plants. When the plants are transpiring water, what's happening? We're building soil. When we're evaporating water, what's happening? We're leaving salts on the surface and we're having issues. We don't have those root exudates. We're not building soil, we're going the wrong direction. So the cover cropping, once again, this is a tool to build soil health, and there are concerns, probably the reason why we're here. Number 1, drought and water use. Number 2, tying up nutrients, competing over the cash crops, and creating weed issues. If you want to see what Western Australia soils look like, this is it. It's not pretty. When Christine Jones goes out to that part of the world, she's always amazed they can grow anything. But yet, you go out there and you see these trees that are 150 feet tall. There's something flowering every month of the year because you don't have this thing that we have called frost. Well, they have light frost, but not heavy frost. But every month of the year in Western Australia, there is something flowering. What does that mean in nature? Water-wise. Nature does not flower to produce seed if she knows it's going to be a fail, right? She knows that there's going to be enough water in the system for that plant to flower to produce seed to then reproduce. There are going to be some spin-offs on it of seed dormancy and delayed germination and those sort of things. But 95% sand, less than 1% organic matter, something's flowering. So this is the Haggerty's farm. So, first thing you notice when they start digging up plants, these rhizosheaths. Every one of their plants that I dug up had a very strong rhizosheath. They use polycrops during their winters. So that's when they grow their crops. So between March and October. So they grow polycrops in rotation, where they do grazing, intensive grazing on these paddocks to help build up the nutrient cycling and create armor. The other thing they do is they don't worry about weeds. This is a weed called mulla mulla. These weeds are there to fix our soils. So they're not concerned about it. They kind of let them do their succession in the soil and the plant succession. They seed into it. They don't go in and using a lot of herbicides. They're going to get into some crimping. They're going to get into a few different things, but they're allowing the system to heal itself. So the year that I was there with that 1.5 inches of rain, this is what their wheat crop looked like. Once again, everybody in the room's probably tried to grow wheat on 1 inch of rain. Doesn't really go very well. But because of their system, they go with a biological system. They haven't used synthetic inputs for 20 years on 95% sand, 1% organic matter, but they're producing on average about a 35 bushel wheat crop. What they're doing is a liquid or a dry compost on the seed, along with some vermicast, some humates, and some kelp. They're using a compost extract in furrow, a liquid extract, and then they're going in with a foliar. A simple program like that. If they go in with a herbicide, the next day they come in with a foliar extract. Any damage they do to the soil, the soil system, they want to repair it quick. This year they took over 1,500 acres in March. That was high tillage and high synthetics. And you'd think in Western Australia with high tillage on 95% sand, 1% organic, but that's crazy, isn't it? Especially at a zero-till convention. But you wouldn't believe the amount of summer fallow in Western Australia. Blew my mind. But anyways, so they took over 1,500 acres. In March, they ran their sheep across it. They then went in with wheat. They used their extract or their compost on the seed, the extract in furrow, a foliar app, because they said 1,500 acres out of 32,000 acres. Why would they go and buy a fertilizer for it? Let's try it. They ended up with a 30 bushel crop out of it, which was about the same as everybody else and everything else on their farm. So they can take highly synthetic, high tillage soils and basically get them functioning in 1 year. So there is hope for taking something that is, in quotes, abused and make things functioning on dry land. So when we start talking about cash cropping, we're talking about the competition being concerned. This is where, a lot of the decisions of what species are going to use and what kind of seeding rates. So the cover crop should only be a small part of the total plant stand. So, that 20 to 30% is the number that I use. It can be done to 10%. Basically, all we need is a couple of plants underneath this canopy to make a big difference. So, if we're looking 1 to 4 seeds per square foot. If you're seeding a durum at 20 to 25 seeds per square foot, or 800 to 900,000 seeds per acre, that's a couple of plants is all you really need. And we want to pick these crops that are synergistic. We don't want to have things that are going to be really aggressive. So if we are talking about seeding down some turnips or radishes with it, those are scavengers. We want to have synergistic plants that are mycorrhizal, that are going to be doing some good function to the system. So one of the things that we've been doing is when we're growing our spring cereals, we're throwing in 10 pounds of winter wheat in with our spring cereals in dry land conditions. That winter cereal is going to be growing underneath the canopy. 1 or 2 seeds per square foot is all we need. When that plant's in the vegetative stage, it's going to be releasing up to 80% of its carbon it gets as root exudate. So it's going to really be extending that time that we're feeding our soil biology. When we have our durum crop or our wheat, when it's in the vegetative stage, how many days is it in that vegetative stage? Any guesses? Never thought of it, have we? It's about 30 days. After 30 days, now that plant switches to vegetative or reproductive. It starts directing a seed head to produce that stalk and the leaves and everything above ground. It takes a lot of carbon, so the root exudates drop off dramatically. So we need that plant growing underneath that canopy to keep feeding our soil biology. That soil biology is going to build better soil aggregation. That better soil aggregation is going to be able to infiltrate more water, and it's going to be able to store more water. Because water follows carbon. And we can get the carbon in the ground, we're going to store more water. So those are some of the things. So number one, keep that seeding rate low of that cover crop when we're talking about dry land. When we start talking about tying up nutrients, and we're concerned about N, throw in some low-growing legumes. They'll fix nitrogen for you. Subterranean clover, use a lot of it in the blends in Western Canada. Low-growing, kind of spreads out on the ground, grows about that tall. Really doesn't, if it interferes with harvest and it's this high, you got bigger problems than having some subterranean clover. But this way, the mycorrhizae are going to be sharing the nitrogen. It'll get you a little bit of boost. It's still going to cover the ground, still cool it. You're concerned about the phosphate? Once again, using these mycorrhizae friendly species. So your legumes are mycorrhizae friendly. They're going to share some of that phosphate with your grass crops if you have a good taproot. Make sure you skip your seed-based fungicides. Christine Jones says the first thing when you're growing cover crops and you see a fungicide seed treatment on, send it back. You're better off to go. She said basically you're better off to go without a cover crop than put a bunch of fungicide seed treatments on. The other one is to use a good compost extract, whether compost or compost extract on the seed or in the furrow. Haggerty's have gone to a Johnson Sioux system to supply a lot of their compost for their farm, but they still bring in 100 tons of compost for making it work for themselves. So another little option to get things going. And once again, it kind of goes back to the point that, okay, we're exporting all these nutrients out. How do we get an organic system back in? Composting is one of the ways. So the joke about having the people from the Far East, sending them manure back, there is potential through compost to actually make that work, potentially. There's some issues with heavy metals and antibiotics in that, but that's besides one. That's the next problem we can deal with. So water use is another issue that we are being concerned about. Yeah, no one is going leaning too hard in the back, so if I don't have to use a microphone, I'm not going to. Yeah. So water use. Yeah, that is a concern, isn't it? If we're dealing with an inch of water, we're going to grow a cover crop underneath. I don't need that cover crop, which is not going to pay me any money to use and steal water away from my cash crop. But by using these low-growing mycorrhizal-friendly plants with a deep taproot, mycorrhizae, the whole thing of these polycrops, they're very socialist. They want to make sure that that whole system is going to work. Unless you're dealing with a scavenger plant, then they don't care about anybody else. But when we have a mycorrhizae-friendly plant in a mix, what's going to happen is that, especially if it's a deep taproot, so whether it's a subterranean clover, whether it's chicory, whether it's sandfoin, alfalfa, any of these deep taproots, they're going to bring up moisture, and they're going to share that moisture with the plants around them if they're struggling. If we have this mycorrhizae system going. So I forget which of the universities it was, but they grew some, it was in the Midwest here. And one of the things they did was they were growing some chickpeas and some wheat together in these soil towers. So they had these 2 towers filled with soil, chickpeas and wheat growing in separate rows. In the one tower, they had a plastic divider between the 2 plants. This one they didn't. What they ended up doing is they put those both towers under drought stress. Where they put the drought stress on with the plastic divider, the wheat died. Where they didn't have a divider, the wheat kept living. So the chickpeas were bringing the water up from deep in the profile, sharing it with that wheat to keep it alive. So that's part of it. The other thing that we're going to be looking at is when we have that winter wheat growing underneath our spring wheat crop. Now we have a green plant. So our wheat plant is hopefully this high, maybe it's this high, whatever height it is. But your winter wheat's going to be about this high, right? 1 per square foot, maybe 2 per square foot, depending on your seeding rate to your goals and how crazy do you think I am? Whether you want to do some fall grazing on it after. If we're going to do fall grazing, crank it up a little bit. That's important. If it's not, 1 or 2 is all you need. Because if we have one winter wheat plant growing in 1 square yard, dig up that plant and see what that root system's doing. It is a massive root system. That biennial, that first year, the shoot to root ratio is actually really low. So it's going to produce more root than it is the shoots or the leaves. The thing with it is when we have this green plant growing underneath a plant that is, carbon nitrogen ratio is getting a little wider, we're dealing with a little more mature plant, that winter wheat plant that's green is going to cool off quicker in the air than anything else. When that leaf cools off, what happens to that leaf? It gets wet. When that leaf is wet, it's either going to absorb that moisture if that plant is dry and needs that water. If that plant has enough water to survive, it's going to kind of ball up and it's going to drip onto the ground, which is going to feed the soil biology, it's going to feed our wheat crop. So this is what Walter Jenny talks about, the micro water cycle. The water cycle on this small area. Because when we have these crops growing and they're starting to mature, what do we have green in our soils? If it's green, we're looking at going up and spraying it. We want to maintain that green plant growing for as many days as we can. The other thing about having, whether it's a subterranean clover or it's the winter wheat or something else low growing, it's going to help shade that ground. We're going to start taking out the E out of ET, especially in the fall. This fall system, when you look at the natural system, we normally have something green or trying to be green for 365 days of the year. Dr. Chris Nichols says in central prairies in Canada, we should have something green in the soil for a minimum of 260 days. That's ridiculous because we only have between 100 and 120 frost-free days. So how can we keep a green plant for 260 days green? Guess what? When I'm growing my biennials, you push the snow away. What color is the plants underneath the snow? It's green. When it's green, it's still doing something. Not a lot, but it's still doing something. Creating weed issues. This is one of the things when I started getting into selling cover crop seed, producers would come to me and say, okay, I don't want a weed problem in year 2. I don't need these things getting away from me. So next week, going to be listening to Rick Clark, and going to be chatting with him about his chicory problem that got out of control. When we start talking about these species that get out of control on us, why? What's the matter? How do we manage these things if it get out of control? So one of the things that we look for in Western Canada are biennial crops or full season crops that don't have enough time to mature and then winter kill. So this is where I'm going to talk about some species that are going to be coming up for options. They work for us. What we're going to do here is look for sideways substitution. So that when I'm talking about sideways substitution, so when I'm looking at an annual legume to put into some of my mixes, and I have, I'm using crimson clover. Okay, everybody heard of crimson clover? What happens if crimson clover goes up to $9 a pound? I'm not going to use that, and I'm going to use Persian clover because it's at 4 or whatever substitution. So it's the same functional plant group, just different species. So that if winter wheat isn't what you want to use fall rye, use fall rye. You want to use winter triticale, use winter triticale. You just have to know the implications of using those different species. So we need to know the maturity. So when we're growing these cover crops, in our cash crops, we want to make sure that the species we're using, if we don't want them to become a weed problem, that they will not go to seed before our cash crop. So we need to do a little bit of homework on that. So this is where the biennials work really, really good. Or, we're able to manage them so they don't get past flowering. And then the other thing is picking species compatible with your herbicide systems if you're still using herbicides. We can get to the point where we can get away from herbicides. We have to earn the right to do that. So we have to do a little bit of homework. And for me, when I'm going through and looking at what herbicides can we spray on our subterranean clover in our wheat, in Canada, nothing's registered. US, I don't know if anything's registered either, but what I do is I look for research studies that have used different herbicides for weed control in seed production. If it works in seed production somewhere in the world, it'll probably work in cash cropping. So you just have to do a little bit of homework on that. Once again, are the big companies going to do a lot of research and spend a lot of money for registration for minor use herbicide use on cover cropping, which is going to reduce the amount of herbicide you're going to be using in the future? No, thanks. So we have to do a little bit of homework. So these functional plant groups, if you heard me talk last year, I worked with the Native Indian triangle of the three sisters. So your legume, your grass, and your broadleaf, but because broadleaf are by definition not grass or legumes, I put in non-brassicas, brassicas, and forbs. People will then argue that legumes should be in with the forbs because they are flowering herbaceous plants. Because they have do this little trick called nitrogen fixation, I separate them up. But those are the main functional plant groups. Within each one of those, potentially we have warm and cool season species within each group. Then we have annuals, biennials, and perennials. This is where we gain our functionality in our system. So this is a picture of some durum in southwest Saskatchewan. And once again, he was going to do some fall grazing on it. So he went up to 25 pounds of winter triticale in his durum. I didn't put the picture in, it was too low quality, but with his durum, with that winter triticale, was growing about waist high on about 3 inches of rain. Right across the road, the person used best management practices, used an agronomist, went in with, he might have went in with a pre-seed till, he went in with the full rate of durum with no winter triticale, but he put a fungicide seed treatment on. He used a full rate of fertilizer. He used a fungicide. Agronomically, the best management practices, right? That durum was this high. When we start adding synthetic fertilizer to our system, it messes up our natural interactions and our plant's response and utilization of water. Because when we start looking at what happens when we start adding synthetics to our system, it really breaks these natural relationship in the soil. This is a picture, I'm cheating, this is up in the Dauphin area, so north of Brandon, sorry. And no synthetics, a full cover crop underneath, really high in legumes, so he has some soybeans in there and some a bunch of other herbs and spices. Go through them if you're interested. So no synthetic, seeded June the 7th, which is a little on the late side, right? That silage crop went 20 tons. Economics, yeah, pretty good. Once again, when we went through and designed this cover crop that was going underneath here, I was thinking of synergistic plants. So when we're talking about cool season grasses going into this, that's a problem. We're putting brassicas in, that's a problem. Legumes, forbs, it was pretty good. Plus, I got some fall grazing out of it. So when we start looking at cover cropping, some of the things that we're using in cereals in Western Canada are winter wheat, winter triticale, and Italian ryegrass. So this is Italian ryegrass. Here it's going to overwinter. Is there a species, a warm season species we can put under it to have it vegetative, growing into fall, late enough maturing so that it'll get a frost and die? I don't know. Anybody here playing around with something like that? Sudan. So I've started up being involved with another group in Australia. And one of the things that they were doing is putting Sudan grass in with their wheat. And then harvesting the wheat, having a little bit of green going through, and then Sudan grass regrows.
In the spring wheat.
In their spring wheat. Okay. I thought that. Oh, absolutely. Sunflower
Freezes off.
Yep.
Grows underneath.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and that, I love that idea. But normally, if we're talking dry land, the reason why, we had to do a lot of soul searching, reevaluate where cover crops fit in the dry climates. If we see them in the spring and have them as a relay crop growing after we harvest our cash crop and they continue growing, okay, they're established, going to be okay. To seed something after a wheat harvest, we're waiting for rain. Halfway. Didn't even have to wait. So absolutely, that's a great.
It depends on
What
you call a dry climate.
And that's the other thing that I've been
About
wanting.
inch and a half to 5 inches of rain. We're talking about 30 inches.
And that's when Western Canada is talking about, oh, we need to use sorghum as our forage crop because in Illinois, they talk about the drought tolerance of it. Drought tolerance is 12 inches of rain. That's a drought. Exactly. So that's the reason I started out with Western Australia. When they talk about inch of rain in 12 months, that's dry. That's dry. Southwest Saskatchewan, southeast Alberta. Yeah, inch and a half of rain. There's Cactecker. That's 12 inches. In eastern Saskatchewan, our average rainfall through the growing season was 7, and we get another 5 inches of snow, of moisture through snow, so we get 12 inches in our growing season. Never mind 12 as a drought. So that corn crop that went 20, it got about 6 inches of rain. Put it in perspective. So drought, and it's all so that when the white man at the back was talking about the same rainfall in Texas as Brandon. Brandon has trees. Texas is a desert. Yeah, drought. Evaporation. And when we get that covered, like when we start talking about cover cropping, and we get into some of these biennials. Down through here, when does the snow leave? When the snow leaves in Canada, the drills are usually out when there's still snow in the road allowances. So there's very little time between the snow leaving and us seeding, whereas here it could be 4 to 6 weeks. So we need to have something green growing to build that up. But yeah, exactly. So if you have the moisture, do it. If you don't, seed it and then have it as a relay crop. So John Martin, he's one of the guys that was doing this sorghum in with his wheat. So the sorghum would get as high as the wheat, You'd go in, you'd combine, all that green material would go back, especially if you had animals, kick them out there, just increase that grazing performance. So biennial grasses, subterranean clover, white Dutch clover. White Dutch clover, it will overwinter, it will produce seed here. It can become a little weedy. Black medic is the other one that people are starting to look at. Then plantain and chicory. Once again, they will overwinter. The chicory can produce seed. What we find though is when our calcium and our fungal to bacterial ratio take off, the chicory disappears. It's more of an early successional plant. So when we talk about pulses, once again, pulses, you're going to be cutting a little closer to the ground. So we have to really watch our cutting management. So we may have to go in and do a seeding after herbicide application, just so we can have our cash crop, our pulse, get a little further ahead, so that our cover crop underneath it is going to be under competition to stay low. So we may have to have that bit of a delay there. Once again, our winter cereals, our biennial crops, our plantain and chicory, and our reports that chicory will tolerate pursuit, odyssey type of herbicides. But really needs to keep low below that cutting height of when you're cutting it. When we start talking about our oil seeds, once again, our winter cereals, we may have to go in because of our herbicide programs, seed after our herbicide application. Once again, dry climates, going to be riskier to get those established. Subterranean clover, white Dutch clover, yellow blossom sweet clover, especially if we go into the Clearfield system, that will work. Plantain and chicory. The reason why the plantain chicory, I keep putting those in there, is those are calcium and phosphate accumulators. One of the things we're missing in our rotation are these forbs. If we're seeding down a pasture or a hay stand, get some plantain and chicory put into those paddocks, those fields. The animals will hunt them out to graze them first. If you see dandelions, a nice healthy dandelion plant growing out in your pasture, and you kick the animals out, go back the next day and look for a dandelion. They're gonna be gone. Why? What mineral do you use with your livestock? What is the first?
Salt.
What kind of salt are you looking for? You're looking at
Sodium
your calcium phosphate ratio, right? We put it from the plant form, way more effective of getting into that animal. And so on our farm, we had these diverse cover crops. The last couple of years, we were custom grazing bison, and we on one of our quarters we had some wildlife land, so owned by Ducks Unlimited and Saskatchewan Wildlife. And so guess where everybody comes hunting? On that quarter. So we had our big fence around to keep the bison in, but we never brought the bison in until after just about the end of hunting season. So the people were in there, they were pushing this bush, and they were asking, where all the deer go? So I don't know, you guys are in the bush, you tell me where they went. I'm busy farming and keeping the bison and going and everything else. 2 weeks after hunting season, there was 300 white-tailed deer grazing in my 400 acres of cover crop in with the bison. People would stop in and say, well, where did they come from? And why are they just on your land, not the neighbors? Is it because of the bison? They like the bison, they're friends? Maybe not. I had diversity in the land, and I put in some fairly high rates of plantain and chicory. Anybody here raising or know anything about bison? Raising bison? So during the winter, they don't put on weight, especially I had some yearling heifers. They normally don't put on weight. Because I had a lot of these forbs in my mix, when the guy picked them up in the spring, he said, a little on the fat side. He said he's never seen that. Then when he took them home, he processed his bulls that he's feeding old pasture and hay, he had to deworm them. These two are natural dewormers, along with the sandpoint and Sexy Monkfish I had. They're natural dewormers, so he didn't have to deworm his heifers. So that may be another reason why they put on weight. So post-harvest, if moisture's good, then we can look at, you know, whether aerial broadcasting prior to harvest, so this way we're getting more days, or we drill in after harvest. We have to make sure the moisture's in. But it's another option. The ones I like using in the fall: oats, sunflowers, buckwheat, turnip, radish, kale, collards, hybrid brassicas. Relatively cheap, put in the ground. They don't cause a lot of issues, and once again, can add more diversity to a rotation. You could add some things that will overwinter. So put in some hairy veg, put in some winter cereals. You have options. Once again, depending on what your goals are, what you know, are you willing to go out and do some spring termination? Those are the things that we have to look at. And you know, is it too late? All we need is 30 days of growth to start seeing results. It takes about 30 days to start building soil aggregates in the soil. It takes about 2 weeks for soil aggregates to start breaking down. So you're better off to have something in there at least maintaining for 2 weeks and it dies, than to just let it coast into winter and have your soils become weaker. So when we have these biennials, and once again, this year that I was out seeding green, I was so smart. I'm smarter than Jimmy. I'm brilliant, because we were getting the forecast. It was going to be you know, close to the first part of May. It was going to be 100 degrees out. There was going to be a 30-mile-an-hour wind coming. I'm so smart. Look at this cover crop I have growing. It's all biennials. It's coming up. It's going to protect my soil. I nailed it. I'm a genius. Genius didn't think that, okay, so because this hot weather was coming, it wasn't raining, all the snow left, what happened to my soil moisture? Triticale was this high, and after a week of warm and wind, it was up this high. My soil moisture was gone in the top 3 inches of the soil. So when I seeded my cover crop into it, it took almost the end of June before I actually got anything to germinate. So when we're using these biennial blends, we have to monitor these spring soil conditions. If it is dry, terminate it and leave it as armor. This way, it's going to protect that moisture you have there. You have that green growth in the spring, you got the biology going, but leave the armor. If your spring is wet, so we're getting a little further north, or we can get the spring rains and it just won't stop raining, it's going to use the moisture. It's going to get air into that soil. You're going to have a functioning system. Never mind the fact that you have all the biology going. I know you say you hate hoe drills, but this is the old garbage that I was seeding with. So I'm not as advanced as what you have. So this is a 8800 Bordeaux air seeder on 8-inch centers. And so for me, it was a big change going from a 2-inch spoon to a 1 3/4-inch hole opener. Seeding at 1/2 inch. If it was dry, I would seed at 1/2 inch. If it was wet, I'd seed at 1/2 inch. Seeding sunflowers to teff grass, if you know what teff grass is, 1.4 million seeds per pound. And it worked. This is when we start talking about soil and plant succession. Soil and plant succession go hand in hand. Love this chart because it goes through and it really describes what's happening. And once again, we're going along. This is what nature proposes that she wants to do. But in dry conditions, we get limited. We get limited because we have the lack of moisture during the season, which will then stop our fungal growth in the soil. And then that's going to monitor, limit how far we can get along with our fungal to bacteria ratio. So that this is what nature wants to do. When we're seeing our weeds, we're down in through here, we're dealing with nitrates, high excess nitrates in the system. We want to get away from this excess free nitrates. When we look at a pasture stand, a hay field, something native pasture, native stand, what do we see for wild oats? Nothing. Because nature cycles these nutrients and it doesn't cause an excess. And when we can cycle these nutrients effectively, is done with a green plant. So the more days we can have that green plant, the better. So what happens when we are in a drought and those green plants die? Well, we just stop that forward progression in our plant succession, our soil succession. That's the reason why you don't see a lot of trees. Like, the beavers down into this part of the world when there's fires going through and drought and all these other problems, you don't see the trees. So livestock, it's the easiest way to justify cover cropping. You get your number of days or bales per acre, you have your input cost, you have your value of your seed, your cost of your cover crop providing the feed. There's your numbers. It's really easy to justify. For cash cropping, what does having that one plant of winter wheat growing underneath your spring wheat, what return does that give you? But in the future, it's going to suppress the weeds during that growing season, cycle the nitrates through as amino acids and proteins. It's going to be increasing your soil aggregation, increasing your water infiltration. Put a dollar on that. And it's really, really tough. So if you can have the option, and once again, 22 years on the farm, 21 years I had livestock on my land. I did not own a single animal. Shouldn't say that. I owned one horse for 1 year. My grandfather gave it to me for my birthday when I was 3. He bought it back when it was 4. It ate 400 pounds of frozen potatoes and died. So I did own one animal for 1 year. But this whole thing of this livestock integration is really important. So one of the things by having these cover crops, especially under dry conditions, it gives you a spot to put animals when your perennials need that rest. Clayton Robbins, he'd be another good guy to come down and have some, give a chat about grazing systems. He talks about allowing your perennials to rest in Western Canada through August, September, October. So is it here, September, October, November? Somewhere where before it is dormancy. When it's going through those last 3 months before it goes dormant, it's sending a lot of carbohydrate and energy down into its crown, into the roots. So that this way it can overwinter, next spring it can start regrowing quickly. The other really neat thing about the perennials that time of year, qualities will potentially start dropping a little bit, and we can design cover crops that are going to be peaking. So now, when we're kicking animals out onto a crop that we've harvested and we have this green growth underneath it, those animals are going to put on some fantastic gains, number one. Number two, we're allowing our perennials to get set up for next year. So those are some of the options that we have. When these plants are in this vegetative stage, our sugar content, so if we do our bricks numbers on it, tend to be higher. Our protein is higher because we're growing less of a plant. Basically, when I tell people when you're doing something like this, use your own seed as that base of that blend, and then add functional plant groups to add that diversity. That brassicas, do not overuse them. 5% of your total plants should be at maximum a brassica. So if you are talking about 30 seeds per square foot, 1.5 seeds should be brassicas at the max. Because when brassicas hit the rumen, it doesn't do good things to the rumen. On cash crop ground, this relay cover crop, this one that makes more and more sense because of the fact that we can go in, harvest the cash crop, now we have some green plants on the ground. To justify it, cash crop wise, you kick the cows out or bring some cows over. Now we can say, okay, we got 50 cents a cow a day for grazing, 10 minutes left. Didn't even have to wave too much. So we grow this cash crop, have that story species growing underneath. It's still going to be building mycorrhizae. It's still going to be building soil aggregates, root exudates going through. Now we can start cashing in on the grazing part. Assuming this cash crop does not choke out your cover crop. So that if we go in with too high a seed rate with a cash crop, if we do run out of water, sometimes that happens where, you know, we're planning on getting 4 inches of rain in the growing season, sometimes we don't get that. So sometimes it just, you know, it doesn't develop that root system and dies out. And once again, these biennial grasses, low growing clovers, they make so much sense in putting in a blend like this. When we're talking this time of year, or a little earlier, nitrates are a bit of a concern. So if we're not cattle producers, not quite understanding it, make sure you're working with someone that understands. So after after frosts, when these plants are green and you get this frost, something with high protein, those cell walls expand, the cell walls burst, and they release the cytoplasm into the rest of the tissue, which usually means at this time, you know, it's still taking up nitrogen, still converting it over. You get this nitrate burst. So, you know, you want to wait that, the higher the protein of the plant, so a plant like this is going to be about 30% protein. Those are highest risk for nitrate issues. So if you have high manure on that field or high fertilizer usage, that's going to increase your risk also. If you're dealing with the sorghums, you have to watch your prussic acid, which is a precursor to cyanide. So when you start adding fertilizer, so this is VJ Thier, outstanding in his field, and so he was playing around with some worm juice. So he put worm juice on the right, and he put synthetic fertilizer on the left, just to show differences. And so one of the things that when we start adding synthetic nitrogen to our soils, to our crops, when that nutrient gets converted over to, you know, if it doesn't get used right away, the soil breaks it down to nitrate. Nitrate is a toxin to the system, so that plant will passively take up the nitrate into the root to try to detoxify the system so it doesn't lose the nitrogen. As this plant takes up that nitrate, it then wants to, you know, convert it to amino acid protein, but if it doesn't need it, it just kind of stores it there. That is a toxin to the plant. So that when that plant has lots of toxin, the solution to pollution is dilution. So what this plant will do will continue to soak up water. Not necessarily for growth, it's to detoxify. Because it has water detoxifying the nitrate, it then gets this, you know, vertical growth. What do you get for yield? Nothing, because it's already used all that water for vegetative growth, and then it runs out at the end of the season when it's trying to produce the seed. So, you know, that's one of the things we want to try and avoid. The other one is the use of fungicides. When I was talking to Christine Jones, she said, you know, the first thing you do if you want to get into regen ag, get rid of your fungicides. Because our system, I'm going to run out of time for my rant about the buying cycle and how it gets us away from regen ag, but that'll do it in another talk, I guess. So this adding fungicides reduces your mycorrhizal saprophytic fungi, reduces your soil aggregation. Your monocrop increases your competition. How's that for thinking backwards? By adding diversity is going to reduce the amount of competition in your rows. In Ag Canada Swift Current, I gave them some monoculture cover crops, and then I gave them 2 mixes. They did their plot tour, they phoned me up, and they said, thanks for the seed. Why, they were tired of answering the question of farmers saying, why did you just irrigate the blend? They said, we didn't. We didn't irrigate anything. They said, well, why did the monoculture crops look so bad and the polycrops look so good? Then you fast forward and you listen to, if you listen to Gabe Brown, you listen to Christine Jones, you listen to, there's quite a few of these soil health people now, they'll use pictures from Oyen, Alberta at the Chinook Applied Research where they did the same thing. They had triticale monoculture, and then they, once again, gave them the seed too. They had the triticale along with their polycrop. Polycrop was up this high, beautiful, green, couldn't see the ground. Monocrop triticale was this high and you could see the ground. Functionality. So as we build soil health, we're going to infiltrate more water. We can infiltrate more water, we're going to hold more water, we're going to cycle nutrients more effectively, we're going to have more diverse soil microbiology in our soil, we're going to have bigger populations, we're going to build resilience and we're gonna build less reliance. That was a saying that the guys at Overton came up with, and I like it. The more we build resilience, we're gonna build less reliance. That's really important. So there's my contact information. If you have any questions, feel free. I'm going to be around for the next couple of days, so you can corner me. Feel free to reach out to me. If anybody is interested, I do have some copies of my second book that I brought more along this year. So if anybody's interested, questions? She had ways to stop so I can keep talking. 5 minutes.
Walking our soils with mycorrhiza and all of this, building our biology and using less synthetics. When we're not replacing back with synthetics, what we're taking off is phosphorus. Say, should we worry in 100 years plus that we're lining our soils up, kind of in terms of phosphorus?
Perfect question. So the question is, if we're using this and reducing the reliance on synthetics, are we just mining our soils? Have you done a mineralogical test on your soils?
We've done a lot of phosphorus work. Our total feed is somewhere around 6,000 pounds. The soil test feed that you get is an estimate of how much of that is quote unquote soluble. Whether it be Olsen or Bray or Haley, depends on what you're using, but it's an estimate of how soluble. All of our soils right now, we run them at 5 parts per million Olsen or less. And put a little bit of starter fertilizer on, just that very first increment. And if we don't get any response, add additional broadcast feed. You can go to our virtual field day that I think I mentioned, and we do a whole thing in there, that virtual field day at 5. So that's a legitimate question, are we gonna run out? But, if you're not shipping a lot of your crops away, then you're cycling your crops. You don't have to worry about that.
Absolutely. And so you did, what, that 6,000 pounds, 6 inch, 12 inch, 4 foot. 4 foot, okay.
And the roots can go to that depth. But the thing with keeping the available soluble low is water quality. The hypoxic zones I talked about, the Great Lakes, and those kind of things, that's soluble. So with no till, with low P, we get no phosphorus. We're right on the edge of the river, so we can get no P moving off. We get very little rainfall, water moving on. Now, when you guys get trouble when you start moving soil particles into the low areas and into the water body. That's the key to keep them getting attached to that soil particle. But when they talk about you put your phosphorus on it and it all gets locked up, well, it's just putting it in that less available state with that mycorrhizal fungi over here. Where we haven't put add and P on, our mycorrhizal populations are 5 times as much as where we put on P. And that's done the real way. I mean, TLFA and NFLA and all those things give you an estimate of mycorrhizal fungi. This is doing it where the county actually growing, taking soil samples, throwing it out and counting. It takes a year to get an analysis done.
Good.
Yeah, we got more mycorrhizal.
Could you summarize what he said? I couldn't hear it.
Okay. So in over years of exporting grain, yes, we're dropping it of our total supply. So in when they did a total amount in 4 feet, there were 6,000 pounds of phosphate. And so normally what I talk about is when we do a Brayer or Olsen and we show 10 ppms, and if we ever did a mineralogical test on that, so it would be about 1,000 pounds of phosphate in the top 6 inches. That is there. How do we get it out? And so when we get the biology going, That's going to help free that up. And so if we ever run out of that 1,000 pounds in the top 6 inches, if we have soil health and we start building our aerobic zone, now we go to 12 inches. Now we have, pick a number, 12,000 or 2,000 pounds, 1,500, 17. So we do have that capacity to get that root zone deeper. So on the front of my book, our soil definition is the A horizon is between 4 and 6 inches thick. I have a picture of a shovel that is, it's down 2 feet, A horizon. So now my rooting zone has gone from 4 inches down to 22 inches. Now what is my phosphate availability? So some of the ways around it. So if we want to get away from the use of synthetics, this whole composting thing, it's real. So now we can be using, phosphate-rich compost to then supply. So as a quick rule of thumb, yes, 10 ppms on a soil test, but he's adding 5 pounds of starter phos, not seeing response by adding any more. And where they don't put the phosphate, they see 5 times the amount of mycorrhizae fungi in the soil. So the biology will create, it will cycle. Is it, sticking my head in the sand saying we never need to add any phosphate to the soil? No. But how do we make it more available in the system? Biology. Using the plants like the plantain, like the chicory, getting the mycorrhizae going, using the compost and the compost extracts. All of these things, a systems approach, we need to figure out, so when we see this bank account of our savings account of 6,000 pounds in the soil, and our crop needs 30, how do we tap into this if we only have 10 parts per million that's available? So, yes, concern, do we have to worry about it in our generation? No, but how do we educate, how do we move this forward? So this is where that.
If you grab for it, we got a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
And the big key is specific uptake. Amount of uptake for cancer groups. Early in the season, phosphorus is very high because phosphorus doesn't.
Perfect. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for No Till in the Plains for inviting me